Hey guys, it's Goosebumps Completionist, and today I'm bringing you a book review from the classic original 62 book series. And it's book number 36, The Haunted Mass 2. I'm just going to say this up front. I know that this book is a divisive book, and what I'm about to say might really anger some people on the opposite side of the spectrum that I lie on this book. And I'm referring to the people out there that don't like this book. I still love you, regardless. But I'm in the camp that loves this book. I I have yet to find a Goosebumps book that can disturb me through the scenes that this book showed. And part of that was I was able to put myself in the main character's shoes in this story. And not a lot of people can probably do that with this type of character. I know it's pretty hit or miss. I think it's has a couple things to do with uh, investability, and people's predisposition going into the sequel, thinking that it has this huge role to fill after the amazing Haunted Mass book, which I don't think any of the Haunted Mass sequels can ever live up to the original book, to be honest. So I stress with the utmost importance about this book is you need to go into it without having the expectations of it being a clone or a copy of the first book, because it's not like that. All right, I don't think I have now read all of the Haunted Mass sequels. I don't think any of the Haunted Mass sequels are perfect by any means, and all three of them retcon things. All three of them feel a little bit different, but I'm gonna say a few things I like about this book off the bat, and then get into the plot overview. I like having a different protagonist. That's not Carly Beth. That's one strength for me going into it. I like having a different mask other than the same green mask that we always see in every other book. That's another thing I like about it off the bat. In 3, I like how it explores a different take to the story, offering some different methods not utilized in the first story, stuff like that. I'll get into that later on in the review portion, but on paper, I would definitely prefer this over all the other Haunted Mass sequels that we have gotten on paper as well. Like I would choose this over the other two. Just saying. That's just me though. I might ruffle some people's feathers when I say that, but uh, I just inherently prefer something like this over those. And that's not taking anything away. I do have reviews coming out for those books, but in regards to this book, I really dig it. And even though it's a divisive book, I still recommend that if you have not read this book, you need to try it before we get into anything else. You need to at least try it. You may really like it, or you may not like it at all, or you may be in the middle. It depends. So let's get into the plot overview without giving too much away. Now, a lot of stuff happens in this book, so much so that I'm going to try to keep this one short and sweet, because there's a lot of little things that add up in this story. It's a lot to cover, so I'm just going to kind of skim the surface here. So all you need to know is that Carly Beth had two bullies in her first book, Chuck and Steve. This book is centered around Steve, which is one of the bullies in that duo. And Steve has gotten punished and sentenced to coach a little league soccer team at his school because he set a squirrel loose in the gym. And ever since he started coaching these kids have been just tormenting Steve and testing his patience, and keeps pushing his buttons. And one day things go a little too far when these kids take a concrete ball and bring it to the soccer practice and paint it to make it look like a soccer ball, and then prank Steve by having him try to kick it into the goal. And Steve basically almost breaks his foot. And Steve, this is pretty justified here, that Steve really wants to get back at these kids, because these kids are just really mean 5 and 6-year-old kids. But I will say this: these kids are hilarious in this story, and every scene they're in, they just steal the show because they have some witty characters in the mix of the group, and they just do some funny things, and they kind of subvert your expectations about them in a few ways where, you know, they make some offhanded remarks and make you chuckle, or they do some things that just are funny. You know, I really enjoy the Soccer Team Kids. I just want to share that with you. But yeah, like getting back to the Steve thing. So Steve confides in Chuck saying, I'm going to scare these kids. I just haven't come up with an idea yet. But that all changes when, as they're walking, they notice Carly, Beth, and Sabrina. And Steve comes up with this idea, oh, I'm going to get a mask like Carly Beth's mask from last Halloween. The one like the one that she had, that she used to scare us, right? Referring to him and Chuck's experience with Carly Beth's mask the previous Halloween. Steve wants to get a mask that is like Carly Beth's mask because that mask was one of the scariest things he's ever seen in his life. So he corners Carly Beth and Sabrina as they're coming home from, I think, a Halloween party or something. And Carly Beth is holding a plaster of Paris head. And Steve and Chuck basically ambush the girls and take the plaster of Paris head and start demanding that Carly Beth tell them where, you know, she got the mask last Halloween. Now, Carly Beth, it's important to know that Carly Beth has basically changed a whole lot since the first book. She's much more stronger. She actually pulled a little jump scare on Chuck and Steve before they started, you know, stealing the head from her. Chuck and Steve were trying to prank her, you know, before, and then Carly Beth bested them. You know, it's good to see Carly Beth evolve from the situation she was in the story prior. It's always refreshing to see that in a sequel book, especially when you have returning characters. I like that Stein was able to keep that track with Carly Beth in the story. But yeah, Steve and Chuck aren't letting up. They keep playing back and forth with the plaster of Paris head, and then Carly Beth just caves in and tells Steve where the mask shop is, where she got her mask. And then she immediately regrets it and tells him, and basically urges him not to go get a mask. And Steve's like, okay, whatever. And then it goes into the next day where Steve has to get dressed up in this really nice sweater to go to picture day, and he has to coach soccer practice after, and he has this plan to go to the shop after soccer practice. And when he goes to soccer practice, these kids pull another prank on him, get him muddy, and this riles him up even more. He's like, oh yeah, I'm definitely going to get you now. So he meets up with Chuck, and he goes to where the shop would be, and they realize when they get there that the shop looks closed for business. Nothing's really inside. It looks vacant. But they notice this door squeaking in the alleyway, and they go in the alleyway, and they realize it's a cellar door that leads down into the basement of the shop. And Chuck and Steve go down in there and start rummaging through boxes, right? And as they're rummaging through boxes, Chuck finds a box full of these masks, which are presumably the unloved masks from the previous book. These masks are warm to the touch, even though they're in a dark, cold, and damp basement. They feel like skin. They look real. They look like they have real bugs crawling in them. And Steve and Chuck realize that these have to be the same mask Carly Beth had. They start hearing footsteps upstairs. Chuck decides to bail and leave Steve by himself. Then the basement door opens, and he's basically confronted by the shop owner. And Steve, you know, nervously asked him, hey, are you the shop owner? Are these masks for sale? And the shop owner says, oh, we closed. We no longer are in business. But Steve won't let up and keeps pressuring the guy. He's like, look, I can't sell you these masks. They're not for sale. They're too real. You need to leave. If you don't leave, I'll have to call your mom. And he's like, and he keeps asking, he's like, here, come with me. I'm going to call your mom to come pick you up. And then Steve has a fight or flight moment where he just bolts out of the cellar door he came in, and the shop owner, you know, doesn't really chase after him. You know, he just lets Steve go. When Steve arrives at his house later, he gets home and he runs up to his room, and it turns out he actually picked a mask out of the box that he was rummaging through that Chuck discovered, but he didn't know which mask he grabbed. And it turns out he actually grabbed a old man mask. And he's so enthralled by how scary it looks, he says, oh, this is going to be scarier than Carly Beth's mask. This is going to scare these kids to pieces. Finally, I'm going to get my revenge. You know, typical things that, you know, Carly Beth went through in the first book. However, there is a point of contention that some people get confused in this book. And I think it was hinted in this scene that happens around this time. Uh, Steve, he's late for dinner and he's in a kind of a hurry, but he wants to see what the mask looks like. So he starts to pull it down over his head, and it gets down to a certain point before, his mom calls him to go to dinner, and, he has to take it off. I think that's implied that was the first time Steve actually wore the mask. I can't be too certain, but if you read the story, you understand that the first time he really technically puts it on, it just sticks to his face immediately. But I don't think that was the first time he put the mask on. I think this was actually the first time he put the mask on, technically. So yeah, Steve technically puts the mask on the first time and immediately takes it off and goes to eat dinner. So he decides to hide the mask in his jacket and put it in his drawer, which he later moves to his closet. And he proceeds to go to school the next day, which is the day before Halloween. And he meets up with this, school soccer team that he coaches, and he tells them, "Hey, meet me at this place called the Carpenter Mansion on Halloween night. Make sure everyone's there, and I got a surprise for you." And the kids are like, "Oh, what is it?" And he's like, "I can't tell you. It's a secret." But he's like, "I'm gonna basically scare you to death." So these kids all agree, like, "Hey, we'll meet there. We'll be there." And Steve can't wait to, make these kids scared and, maybe have these kids leave him alone. So he goes home and he can't wait to try on the mask really and get into character, and he wants to see what it's going to look like. So he goes into his closet, pulls out the mask, and he puts it on. And immediately he feels this tingling sensation to his skin. He starts to notice his voice is different. The mask looks more real than ever. There's spiders crawling in his ears. He's like low on breath. He can hardly move. His dog's attacking him because the dog doesn't recognize who he is, even his voice. And this starts to really creep Steve out. And he starts to try to maneuver across the room to, see if moving around might help. And what happens is his mom comes home with his favorite cookies and tries to get him to come out of his room with his cookies. And Steve is pretending to be sick and tells his mom to go away. He'll get the cookies later. And he's trying to find the line to the mask to get it off, and he realizes that the mask is basically his skin now. And he starts to panic, and he has to drag himself to the phone to call Carly Beth. And he calls Carly Beth's house, and Carly Beth's father answers and asks, who is this? Why are you calling my daughter? And since Steve's voice was unrecognizable, the father thought it seemed kind of sketchy, so he hung up on Steve, and then Steve passed out from exhaustion. There's another scene that kind of goes into a dream sequence that, maybe Steve got out scot-free of the situation and everything never happened, but that was proven to be just a dream. And then he actually wakes up for real, still in the mask on Halloween, day. And he realizes that he's basically stuck in the mask. He has to go to Carly Beth to help him, but he might as well make the best of it. Go downstairs, get some breakfast, get some energy, because he just feels so weak. He needs some energy. And then he needs to go meet the kids later to at least scare them. And as long as he scares them first, then he'll worry about getting the mask off. So he makes his way downstairs, gets himself a bowl of cereal. He starts eating and then realizes that, he's even too weak to eat. I mean, he's lost his appetite. He has arthritis and stuff. It's really weird. And, he has this pestering feeling of spiders constantly crawling around his head and his ears. Ugh, it's just so creepy. So after he's done doing that, a little bit of time passes, and he's about to leave to go out to meet the kids he's trying to scare. He's like, I would go trick-or-treating this year, get some candy, but I'm just too old and too weak to do this, so I just got to make best of the energy I do have and go scare the kids. On the way out, he interacts with his dad and his mom, and his dad's really impressed with his costume. He's like, "Oh, looks really good. This old man hobo look looks awesome," and his mom's grossed out by it. But his dad's like, "This is awesome." They take some pictures. The monologue going in Steve's head during this is priceless, because Steve is like, I got to sit through these pictures, and you can definitely feel like a little bit of sympathy for him. You're like, okay, well, let's get you did what you need to do, and then let's get you out of the situation, bud. I feel so bad for you already, but he gets out of that. Finally, out of his house, he's able to go out, and he makes his way over to the house where all the trick or treaters are supposed to meet up. But when he arrives, the kids are like, "Hey, sir, are you okay?" And Steve is like, "Oh, they think I'm this old man now. Okay, I can't even scare them." See, he does all of this for nothing, basically, and the kids don't find him scary whatsoever. And they ask him if he needs help, and since he's basically low on energy, and the mask is like destroyed his body. He's like, "Yeah, can you take me over to Carly Beth Caldwell's house?" They're like, "Okay, I know where that is." So the kids take him over there and drop him off. And he's like, "You know what? I'll scare him another way some other time. I just need to figure out how to get this mask off." So he makes his way to Carly Beth's house, and he waits for Carly Beth and Sabrina to come home from trick-or-treating, because Carly Beth is hosting a Halloween party at her house, and he knows that he's going to run into her at least at some point. So when Carly Beth finally does come, Steve has been waiting for her, and he calls out to Carly Beth and convinces Carly Beth that it's him underneath a mask. So Carly Beth immediately has this idea, okay, we need to find you a symbol of love. Do you have one? And Steve's like, I don't know. She's like, well, let's go to your house and see if we can find anything. And Steve then remembers these cookies that his mom bought him earlier. He's like, okay, my mom's cookies. Maybe if I eat the cookies, that's a symbol of love. So he goes to ask his mom when they get back to Steve's house, where are the cookies? And it turns out that Steve's dog ate the cookies. So there is no more symbol of love. So Steve is presumably stuck in this situation perpetually. And Carly Beth is like, well, maybe we can go back to the shop to see if there's any other options here. So they head back to the shop, and they go back down into the basement, and they start rummaging through boxes. And this is where it's very spoiler territory here for the story, but they may or may not find a different solution than a symbol of love to get Steve's mask off. And maybe this solution works or doesn't. And it may involve a very creepy scene involving Steve's mask he's wearing. And let's just say after that whole aftermath, things seem to be potentially okay. Maybe potentially not okay. And then you revisit a character that seemed to be missing throughout the whole story, and they somehow have acquired a mask. And that's how the story leaves it. There you go. I'm not going to say who. It is one of those things where it tries to leave you on sequel bait, but we never actually got a Haunted Mask 3, so yeah, bummer. But that's what it is, and that's, in a nutshell, Haunted Mask 2. So let's start off with the strength about this book here. The biggest strength here is how the scenes were able to capture me and put me into that disturbed vibe and aura, while reading it. I can normally find myself getting invested into a character and being able to put myself in their shoes and try to think about what they're going through. But when I sit down and think about what Steve is going through in his bedroom and trying to leave his house, and just the feeling of like spiders crawling in his ear and the uncomfortable feeling he must be feeling, like, it just gets to me. Body horror is some of my favorite horror. It's because it can happen to somebody. It can happen to your body. That's why it's body horror. And it's relatable because everyone has a body, right? What the stuff Steve goes through, I think, even plays on the, even deeper tones of psychology here, where he's not only trapped metaphorically underneath this mask, but he's going through physical pain, physical distress. I mean, this is amplified from Carly Beth's experience with her mask, for example. This mask has debilitated him. I mean, it's even more terrifying when you think about it. Not to mention the humility that he has to learn, because, Steve, I'm not going to be around the bush. Steve is not the greatest kid in the world, but the humility that comes with the mask, I think, kind of helps boost my sympathy for him at the same time. I don't really end up rooting for him at all, but I do kind of care for him, which is really weird. It's one of those weird situations where I'm not rooting for him, but I care for him. And honestly, I dig the concept that it was trying to go for, and it was trying to do something different, right? And I can only applaud a book for trying to do something different, especially as a sequel book when you're dealing with a similar premise. I enjoyed, like I said early on in the video, I love having a different protagonist fronting the story. I love having a different mask with different abilities. I would love that in every single Haunted Mask book. Every sequel, have a different mask. I don't need the same mask. I don't need the same character. Off the bat, that's good on paper. And I actually like the idea of having different methodologies to getting the mask off. You don't need a symbol of love every time. Maybe you can use something else. Maybe you can use like a spell or whatever the case may be. I'm all for that. And I think the story, I'm kind of getting to a little ahead of myself with a negative here, but I'm just going to say this. For what the ending was trying to go for, it was shocking. And it worked, especially the first time you read it. I think it works as you're just like, wow, that's creepy. Now, that might depend on on if you have plugged yourself into the story or have immersed yourself adequately into the story or not. I know the ending and how the resolution for Steve is in contention in the community, whether it's a bad ending or bad climax, or if it's actually a good ending or good climax. There's a lot of people on the fence about it. Now, I happen to be kind of in the middle, so I'm going to get into one of my negatives here about it. And I don't think I'll deduct points on it, honestly. I'm just kind of in the middle about it. It's kind of a positive thing and a negative for me, but I'm not going to deduct anything on it. It's just not explained. Like, there's no scene that can introduce the shop owner again without him like calling the police or anything to kind of help the shop owner be like, oh yeah, by the way, there isn't just another solution of a symbol of love. Hey, this could work too. Like, if there was just that little bit of it in the ending, that would make it a lot more, believable and less convenient feeling than it actually came off. Like Carly, Beth, and Steve just came across this solution. Like, that's literally how it happened. Yeah, I'm kind of with you on the people who don't like it, and I'm also with you with the people that do like it, because I do find it shocking, and it works. But it does have its give and takes, but I'm not going to deduct any points on it. But I just want to say that is something to point out. Another thing I want to point out is some of the humor in this book is dated. But it's only like a thing I'll deduct like 0.1 points off of. A lot of the humor really stuck for me. I thought this book was hilarious, but I'm not going to lie. Some of the flat out jokes are dated. They are. Just saying. So yeah, that's in there. It is a 90s book, so it's a give and take with that. But the biggest thing I'd probably deduct points on, and I'm probably only going to deduct 0.2 points off for this, because to be fair, all sequel books have done this in the Haunted Mask series, and that is that it retcons things. Okay? What I mean by retcons is that because there's no explanation for how the solution came for Steve, it kind of goes against the rules supposedly set in the first book, saying that only a symbol of love can remove the mask. There was never an option of something else to remove the mask that this book introduces. Now, like I said, if they had the shop owner kind of confirm that, then maybe, just maybe, this could have been redeemed in that department for not being a retcon. But this does retcon in that aspect. And a lot of people seem to think that the mask only goes on one time, so that retcons the wearing it twice thing. Like I brought up in my review, I think Steve actually put the mask on twice. The first time he put it down over his head, and then his mom called him for dinner, and then he immediately took it off. Then the second time he put it on to try to practice what he was going to do, and then it got stuck to his face. So I don't think putting the mask on once actually happened. I think he put it on twice. So I don't think that really retcons anything in that department. But it does retcon, like I said, the symbol of love thing. And I guess unintentionally, because I think Stein was just trying to rush through the end, but it is there. So from a 0 to 5 star basis, I only deducted 0.3 off for, you know, those problems I mentioned with like a little bit of the dated humor and, you know, the retconning. But I gave this book a 4.7 out of 5. I think this book is very exceptional. And I know this might make a lot of people mad when I say I gave this book an A, but I think it's truly deserving an A. At least in my book. I really enjoy this story. And I kind of say this a lot about Goosebumps, but Goosebumps is kind of like a food buffet establishment. You go inside and you pay the fee and you get to go to the buffet. There's going to be a little bit of everything, a little different food types of all varieties for people who, you know, like seafood. Let's say you don't like seafood, but somebody else likes seafood. They're going to have seafood there for people who like that, right? You don't have to get the seafood just because you got the buffet, right? Kind of the same thing with Goosebumps. Like this book, let's say you don't like seafood. Let's say this book is seafood. You don't have to like seafood, but there are people who like the seafood. You get what I'm saying? That's how Goosebumps is sometimes, and I guess I'm in the boat where I really enjoy this book, and I do acknowledge how divisive this book is. But when it comes to my personal opinion, I think this book is 4.7 out of 5. I think it's amazing. So yeah, that's my thoughts on the Haunted Mask 2 book. Let me know in the comment section if you have read this book before. Did you love this or did you hate this? I'm dying to know. And I'll see you next time.